You know what I've been thinking about doing a lot lately? Sinning, of course. And what better way to do research on how to best carry that out than by looking at one of my favorite video games, good old Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Because, of course, a bunch of locations in that game are named after the 7 deadly sins, so maybe by analyzing the names, where they come from, and whether or not they fit the locations, I would find a better way to segue into the actual topic of this video, because that was a very bad establishing joke. Today we're going to be talking about how the 7 deadly sins are used in names of Xenoblade 2 areas. In the Japanese version of the game, everything just uses the Latin name of that sin, but in English, most of the names are translated into various other languages, and sometimes made a little bit more metaphorical, but the actual sins are applied to the same locations across both versions. This changes the names without changing the meaning at all, and gives a bit more of a multicultural vibe to the naming, suggesting that different cultures named different places, which would make sense, although the languages chosen for the dub names don't usually match up with the culture each area is most inspired by, or the accent the dub chose to give that area, so this only sort of makes sense. Some of the sins, though, do match up thematically with the people living in the area or the story that takes place around it, so this does make a bit more thematic sense than the towns in Xenogears being arbitrarily named after Hebrew months, which, to be fair, is probably the most arbitrary religious theming in that game. So this will contain spoilers for the names of all the areas, the appearances of all the areas, as well as the plot, just because there's plot going on there, and sometimes that ties into the name. I'm just going to go in order visited, talking about main game and then Torna. So, first off, Gramps is not a sin, so we start out at Argentum, known in Japanese as Avaricia. This is named after the sin of greed, which is very fitting for a corrupt merchant guild ruled over by someone as obviously greedy as Bana. The English name is also Latin, so I'm sort of breaking my own rule there, but it does not directly mean greed or avarice. It's instead the word for silver, as in coins, precious metals, that kind of thing. Something someone who's greedy would obviously want, so this is more of what I meant with making things metaphorical. Next up, we have Gormott, known in Japanese as Gula. This is the Titan of Gluttony. It fits not necessarily in the Titan or its own native inhabitants themselves, but rather in how its resources are being abused and overused by the Ardanian occupiers, as well as how all the major nations in the world kind of want a piece of the pie. The English name is the French word for the sin of gluttony, gourmandise. This, of course, has the same root word as the English and French word gourmand, something that still means someone who likes eating, but has picked up less negative connotations, more meaning someone who enjoys fine food as opposed to someone who eats too much in both of those languages over time. However, the name could also be from Welsh, which should make a bit more sense since the Gormadi are given Welsh accents, as gormod means too much in Welsh, as in too much food, as in you're eating too much food because you're gluttonous. Heyo. Next up we have Oriya, Japanese name Invidia. This is named after envy. The name fits a lot with the nation as a whole because it is envious of Morardane's power, of Morardane's standing in world politics, and of its colonial ambitions, leading to a very long history of rivalry and conflict. Bizarrely enough, though, this is a very rare instance of the English localization of a Japanese game adding Japanese to where there wasn't already Japanese. Because, like I said before, the Japanese name of the Titan is Latin for the sin of envy. However, the English name is derived from the verb urayamu, meaning to envy something. So, Oriya is actually a Japanese name in the English version, but a Latin name in the Japanese version. Weird, but also kind of interesting. Next, we visit Morardane, known in Japanese as Superbia. This one is named after pride. This is one of the biggest, most obvious, most well-known ones. It's the only country calling itself an empire. It clearly embodies this sin more than any other, and is the nation that embodies that sin more than the rest of the nations in the world. Also, pride of the empire is a phrase Morag uses at least once in one of her battle quotes, and I would be very surprised if she didn't say it at all in the story itself at some point. The English name fittingly comes from the Scottish Gaelic language, words for pride there, but I already did a video about how Scottish Morardane is, so watch that one if you want to know more about that. Next, we visit Indal, known in Japanese as Acedia. This is the Titan of Sloth. The name doesn't really make sense since it's been doing plenty, it's not exactly lazy. However, it could mean the more spiritual side of the sin of sloth, being shirking one's religious duties, which would make a lot of sense actually, what with all the corruption. The English name of the Praetorium actually comes from an English word for once, indolence of course, although the roots of that word come from Latin again, this time via French again, which might support Gormott being Welsh, because then you could have French here instead. Next we visit Tantal, Japanese name Luxuria. This one is named after lust. It doesn't make sense as much as some of the others did, as the only things Tantal could be considered to be lusting for are being not under the thumb of Indal, which I wouldn't really consider sinful, and perhaps lusting after the glory of Old Torna, which makes a bit more sense on both fronts. The English name comes from the word tantalize, which is derived from the Greek mythological figure Tantalus, whose punishment embodies the sin of lust in most of the non-sexual contexts. Lastly, we have the Golden Country itself, Torna, with its Japanese name, Ira. This is the Titan of Wrath. Torna doesn't really fit the sin at all. In fact, it's kind of made a point that there isn't really a lot of sinning going on in Torna at all, besides, like, Zedder. And all the conflicts and things are a result of the Aegis War and Indal being bad and stuff, though it is subject to the wrath of Malos harder than almost any other nation, and the organization of Torna later on in the main game probably fits wrath better than any of the other sins. The English name comes from the Dutch word torn, which means wrath, of course. Now, obviously, I skipped quite a few locations there, and that's because there are way more main locations than there are 7 deadly sins, so let's quickly talk about a few more. The World Tree is actually just called the World Tree in both English and Japanese, though Yggdrasil, the Norse World Tree, is applied to it a couple times in the Japanese version of the game. Moritha seems to be derived from the Latin word for death, and Elysium, Paradise, Heaven, whatever you want to call it, it's called a few different things across the languages, is just good afterlife place, or place where you might find a good god, basically. So you got a bit more religious stuff, you got a bit more Latin, but you don't got specifically Christianity here. However, that theming doesn't end, because some of the other locations I still haven't talked about are instead named after some of the 7 heavenly virtues. Now, when I talk about a set of 7 virtues in Christianity, and specifically Catholicism, I could be talking about a few different things. The traditional 7 heavenly virtues are the 4 classical virtues, prudence, justice, temperance, and courage, and the 3 theological virtues, faith, hope, and charity. However, there's also a different set, which is designed to specifically be the opposite of the 7 deadly sins, those being chastity, temperance, charity, diligence, patience, kindness, and humility. There are a couple that are in both sets, but I will mainly be talking about the 7 heavenly virtues, the first set, because there are more locations named after virtues from that set than the other one. And because of that, I'm not really going to talk about how virtue-named locations might counteract sin-named locations, with one exception, just because there aren't very many locations named after virtues that have a counteracting sin. So, going in order again, we have Leftheria, Japanese name Liberalitas. This one is named after charity, at least in Japanese, we'll get to that in a minute. That makes perfect sense for a place founded by Adam and lived in by Rex, don't think I really need to say more about that. Its English name, however, is Greek, for freedom, not charity. I'm not really sure what they were doing there, since freedom is considered a virtue as well sometimes, just not in any of the actual big sets I talked about before. But it is possible that this is a mistranslation, and the translator mistook liberalitas for libertatem, meaning liberty in Latin, and used a Greek word meaning something similar. Temperantia starts a neat trend of things with the same name in both languages. It is Latin for temperance, and it's hard to judge the accuracy of that virtue being applied here since there's no permanent population, and the nation that once lived on the Titan went by a different name, that being Judicium, which comes from justice, which is again hard to judge, because we never saw the kingdom when it was alive. Moving on to the Spirit Crucible, this name is the same in both languages again, Elpis being Greek, weirdly not Latin, for hope. And wow, this fits. I don't think I need to tell you how much it fits. Let's see. Full power of the Aegis being stored there, something necessary to save the world. Hope that Adam's legacy would be fulfilled. Hope that Pyra and Mithra aren't dead. Nia finding more hope in herself that, hey, maybe people will accept me and I could be proud of who I am. Basically what I'm saying is it fits a lot. In Torna, though, Specia/Sperantia is weird because its Japanese name is Latin for hope. To be fair, though, the name fits here too, as it was a literal hope spot for Adam's forces, them gathering about to be super epic freedom gang before Amalthus destroyed them, so it's possible that just words for hope in different languages were something related to the Tornan royal family. I don't really know about that. Its English name, though, comes from the Italian word spezia, which means spice. So this is probably another mistranslation. Lastly, I want to talk about Sia, pronounced the same in both languages, but spelled differently. Nobody so far that I've seen has figured out if this is another virtue name. At the very least, the closest to Latin translation for it is a conjugation of the Italian word for to be in the subjunctive mood, which is a bit too broad to be anything, but I wouldn't be surprised since this was another major titan and major nation if it connects to one of the virtues in some language. So, to recap, the virtues of faith, prudence, and courage are completely missing, while hope has 2 things named after it. So, fanfiction writers, you got 3 titans right there to take names from, so I don't really know what else to tell you. Now to the counteracting sin and virtue thing, because I think this might have been intentional. In the set of sin contrasting virtues, charity is opposed to greed, and Argentum is greed and Leftheria is charity. So let's see. 2 places that Rex lived in for the majority of his life before the game. Getting his good values and stuff from the charity place Leftheria, but being stuck in the greed place Argentum just to get money to send back home. I feel like that was something. But that's all I got, because this is the end of the video. In case you can't tell, I'm really not that good with segues. Heyo, that's why this is going to be a very awkward outro, because yeah, this entire video is probably relatively awkward because, yeah, I haven't recorded in a couple weeks because I pre-recorded all the stuff that went up while I was on vacation. So yeah, fun fact, I guess, before I tell you to like, comment, and subscribe, the opening joke was originally going to be like, I'm thinking about sinning, because I watched Shazam recently, which is true, but joke didn't really work. Like, comment, and subscribe. Yeah, that's all I got. Goodbye.